How's it going, guys? Vaibhav here from GN Tech, and welcome to a camera comparison between the Nokia 7.2 and the Realme 5 Pro. So I'm recording this on the front-facing cameras on both of these smartphones, recording at 1080p resolution. So this is audio also coming from the front-facing cameras, or the microphones rather, and you can judge whether or not both of these phones would be suitable companions for you to vlog your trips on a daily basis or not. You can also judge dynamic range, quality, stabilization, the lot. And yeah, I think with that we're gonna move into the primary camera samples now, both in the day and in the night, followed by video samples. So without further ado, let's get into the comparison. So this is the primary camera setup between the Realme 5 Pro and the Nokia 7.2, a quad camera on the 5 Pro and a triple camera with Zeiss optics on the 7.2, although both have 48 megapixel primary cameras. As for selfies, we're looking at a 16 megapixel one on the Realme, whereas it's a high resolution 20 megapixel one on the Nokia, again with Zeiss optics. Starting this off, we've got this picture of some flowers. In a general sense, the detail captured is fairly identical, but if you look at the flower in the center, it's much better exposed on the 5 Pro. In these samples, both phones' relative AI options have been enabled, and the differences are again same as before. There is an added chroma boost mode on the Realme which sort of enhances the colors in the picture, and this adds to the visual appeal of the photo and saturation overall. Next up is this image. Now here in particular, the big differences are color and dynamic range. The warmer colors from the 5 Pro look a lot more realistic, and if you look at the background behind the tree, the phone is able to capture a lot more detail compared to the 7.2, and so in this case, the Realme's image is better. In a less vibrant scene, the color differences, while present, are not so stark, but again, the Nokia's colors seem off. One example of that is completely taking away from the blue in the sky and giving the photo an overcast look, where in reality it was a sunny day, and I think this is much better captured on the Realme 5 Pro. That being said, the contrast levels from the Nokia 7.2 do make the picture look fairly more detailed. But in more of an open space, I think the photos become difficult to tell apart. Here, it isn't much about the color differences, but more about how the phone processes the foreground. Especially on the surfboards, the 5 Pro has more detail compared to the Nokia 7.2. And I threw this specifically to highlight the differences in dynamic range. The 5 Pro is a lot better here with accurate colors, and in such a situation, the Nokia seems to struggle a fair bit. But this one's interesting. It's a pretty standard photo of a tree where noticeably the colors are completely different. On the 5 Pro, there's a dedicated 48 megapixel mode which I turned on, whereas on the Nokia you have to do it through the settings. This is a result of that change, and if you zoom in further, there seems to be less pixelation on the Realme sample, but aside from the color differences, the difference in detail is nothing major. Over here though, this is an example of where Nokia's color profile excels. So even though the 5 Pro's image is realistic, to someone just looking at these images side by side without context, they'd prefer the 7.2's color balance. This picture gave me a good chance to look at both phones' ultra-wide-angle lenses as well, where deviation in color is not as drastic, but the sharper image is fairly hard to point out. There are some instances where the Nokia looks better and others where the 5 Pro does, but maybe in terms of noise, I'd say the Nokia has less of it, so I'd give the overall photo to the Nokia 7.2 in this case. And although neither of these phones come with any optical lenses, I thought it would be worth comparing zoom levels as well. So at 1x zoom, this is the result, and this is at 2x zoom. Here's what it looks like at 5x zoom, where I tend to prefer the samples from the 5 Pro, and now this is at 10x zoom, which is the maximum both phones can do. There's a lot of artifacting going on here, but this is just so that you can judge both phones' capabilities. Another thing when it comes to capability is macro photos. So the 5 Pro actually has a dedicated macro mode, which is something the 7.2 does not. So here's a side-by-side where the 5 Pro's extra feature set comes in handy, whereas taking a similar photo on the Nokia 7.2 proves to be difficult. With portraits as well, the 5 Pro to me has the upper hand. This is me taking a photo of a complex subject where the 7.2 struggles to nail its focus point. I cannot be too critical of either phone, but side by side the 5 Pro does look better. And for portraits of people, once again, the brightness seems to favor the 5 Pro. But in terms of color accuracy, especially skin tone processing, I do like the Nokia's image. I think edge detection is also a hit or miss on the 5 Pro, but I think both phones can work on dynamic range processing in portraits especially in order to capture more of the background in these cases. And here's a look at selfies, and something that draws my attention straight away is this halo effect visible on the 7.2. I think both phones in terms of detail do great, but I like the overall look of the 5 Pro because it just looks more natural to me. This is with portrait mode turned on, but once again my preference is with the Realme. With that, I think we can move to nighttime photos. If you excuse the 7.2's color shift without night mode, I feel like it's doing a good job. But with night mode, the Realme's image is a lot better, and for some reason the Nokia seems to be worse. Here's another sample, and I think the trend is fairly obvious. The Nokia cannot really capture warm tones well, and once again with night mode, the 5 Pro's quality far surpasses that of the Nokia 7.2. The trend for night photography is also fairly obvious, and once again the 5 Pro just has the better photo, and even in extremely dark situations the phone seems to hold its own fairly well, compared to Nokia's processing. With night selfies though, it's clear that neither phone is too well equipped, and to be honest, I'd sway away from using the front cameras at night, especially with fairly limited lighting. Transitioning over to video, this is 1080p footage. It's pretty clear that the Nokia 7.2 is actually better. The 5 Pro seems to have a green hue to its footage, making it look less natural. Not just this, I think Nokia's stability is also much better. Both phones can also film with the ultra-wide-angle lenses where footage is sharper from the 5 Pro but way more stable on the Nokia 7.2. Even when filming 1080p video at 60fps, I just tend to prefer the results of the Nokia 7.2, and that's a shame considering the footage quality from the 5 Pro looks much sharper. With 4K footage, the difference in stabilization is less obvious, and both phones are fairly on par when it comes to quality of video. Now, the Nokia can in fact record 4K video with the ultra-wide-angle lens, which is something that the 5 Pro cannot do. However, it does take a toll on quality, and I'd recommend sticking to 4K at the normal angle only. With video at night though, the Realme 5 Pro tends to produce the better result of the two. It's not the best quality but more passable than Nokia's, especially with detail. And lastly, this is nighttime video at 4K, where in fact the Nokia actually seems to be doing a better job compared to the Realme 5 Pro. So that's about it for this comparison. Let us know which phone you prefer down in the comments, and make sure to subscribe for more videos in the future. Thanks for watching, this was Vaibhav, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios!